mean, we are literally out of sequence with reality. And to give you a minor example, the number of people that we were able to talk to who spoke English. And every Chinese student now in second grade takes English. I mean, English will clearly be the dominant language on the planet. Everybody in India is educated in English. We go to academic education, it's all in English. Try walking down the street here and finding how many people speak Chinese. It just gives you a sense of the scale we're talking about. And so the question then becomes, how do we refocus ourselves on making sure that not just our children, but those Americans who are 20, 30, or 40 who didn't get good enough educations, and you can't write them off. And you can't say to somebody who's 26 years old, sorry, your schooling wasn't good enough. For the next 50 years, you're going to be economically incompetent. So we need to really think fundamentally, but that involves engagement. How do I get people to decide that life is important enough that they want to get educated, they want to create jobs, they want to show up at work? We do a lot of work with Gallup, and the Gallup people have developed what they call engagement theory. It's a very simple model. So if you walk into a company, there are three groups of people. There are the engaged, the actively disengaged, and the passive. And they say, it turns out, for example, the most engaged company that Gallup has ever tested is the Ritz-Carlton. The 52% of the employees at the Ritz-Carlton are actively engaged in their job. Now, what does that mean? A very simple model that Gallup uses. Somebody who's actively engaged in the company walks down the corridor, they see chewing gum paper on the floor, they will stop and pick it up. Because they're actively engaged in their company being successful, and they're going to do whatever it takes to help their company succeed. Person who is neutral walks down, sees the paper, but doesn't think it's their job, so they walk past. The actively disengaged person threw the paper down. Now, I'm giving you this example because drug addiction is a function of disengagement. Drug addiction happens when people's lives are so empty that finding a substance to make their life seem like it makes sense strikes them as a legitimate trade-off. And for us to be successful in prosperity in the next 50 years, we have to go back to thinking through, how do we get people actively engaged in life? How do we get them actively engaged in a profession? How do we get them actively engaged in creating wealth and in creating companies and creating jobs? Because it's only by, and most of you in this room who are successful know in your own life. You had to find some dream you wanted bad enough to get up in the morning and go work at it. Sometimes you had to work all weekend. And sometimes you had to put a lot on the line. And sometimes you had to wonder late at night whether or not you're going to pull it off. But it kept you focused. It gave you an excitement about life that made it worth your while. And we need to find a way to actively compete in every community in America to draw people away from the kind of passivity and the kind of addiction, which in the end is a dead end that ruins their life, and to draw them into the kind of activity and the kind of dreaming that gives them a better future. And that may seem trivial, but I think it's actually at the heart of the American challenge right now. The last point I want to make is about national security. The best overall military in world history is the current American military. By any standard of activity, I think, in the history of the world, the Royal Navy in the Napoleonic era, the Roman Legion, the Mongols. If you look at the distance we can project power, the speed with which we can do things, the quality of the young men and women who are doing it, the concern they have for doing it right, it is astonishing how well we do. And it is no accident that it's a drug-free organization. I mean, if you went back to the drug addiction level of the late 1970s in the U.S. Army, you could not sustain the current military. It would be impossible. I talked to General Tommy Franks one time, who talked about in 1978 actually going with his top sergeant and going through a barracks with a baseball bat, going after the 2 or 3 soldiers who were the drug dealers. And he said it was a literal internal war. over whether or not the drug dealers or the traditional command structure was going to lead the army. That's how bad it was in the late 70s. Because we'd lost our way and we'd lost our nerve. And so I think you have to stop and look at that and say, okay, what is it that's unique about the American military? We set a standard, we mean the standard, we test to the standard, everybody in the service knows it's real, and they fully expect that they'll be kicked out if they use drugs. And the result is, not that it's perfect, and yes, on occasion somebody uses drugs, but the total number, you look at the age of our military, and you compare them to any other group of the same age in the United States, it is clearly the most drug-free group. And I'm not counting here Mormons or Seventh-day Adventists, so you can find specific religious groups. But other than that, you won't find any other group that's competitive. But what does it tell you? It tells you if you set the right standard, you mean the right standard, you test the right standard, you enforce the right standard, you do the same thing everywhere in the country. And that's what Sweden has done, and that's what Singapore's done. They said, we really intend to be drug-free, and by the way, we mean it. And I think we need to decide, and I think this is going to be a major purpose of our political dialogue in 10 and 12, is are we serious about being a country that for national security reasons, for prosperity reasons, and for the sustainment of freedom, is prepared to say to its young, drug addiction is not going to be tolerated, drug dealers are not going to be tolerated, and we're prepared to set up the systems to make it real and not just make it a slogan. I think this will be a very hard and very important conversation. And I'm an optimist in the Reagan tradition. I think in the end, the American people, by overwhelming numbers, will decide they'd rather live in a drug-free society than a drug-addicted society. And I think they will ultimately change the political context of this country in order to make that implementable. So that's a sweeping overview. And if it's all right, I'm going to take questions. Am I allowed to take questions?